I left in silence, carrying nothing but an old paintbrush and an unborn child. They didn't see me off. They didn't cry. They just shut the door like I had never existed. Now they stand before the chalk wall I built, trying to make sense of the colors they once called meaningless scribbles. But I don't need an apology. I only need them to stand still and watch. I stood beneath the golden lights of the Ashton Heights Gallery, once an old textile mill, now reborn as an art space. The white chalk dust still clung to my fingers, fine, quiet particles that had settled into every crease of my hands, every line of my life, every corner of memory. A small group of guests paused near one of the brick walls, studying a framed drawing, a child reaching up to a chalkboard scribbling in soft colors. Behind the child stood a woman, faded in outline, but unmistakably me. They whispered. One middle-aged man leaned in to read the name beneath the piece, Elena Reed. Then he looked at me, half curious, half cautious, as if he'd just stumbled across a name erased from the family tree he thought he knew. I said nothing. I simply smiled. Not the smile I used to wear to cover pain, to beg for space at someone else's table, but the quiet smile of someone who survived the place that once tried to make her disappear. I used to be the kid who drew on every wooden surface in the Reed estate, every dusty cabinet, every blank wall, a canvas for the world I kept to myself. Wax crayons turned into winged purple cats, endless fields with no exit, dreams that didn't need permission to exist. But in that house of landscape paintings and velvet armchairs, art only mattered if it hung in a gilded frame with my father's signature, Charles Reed, or at least the name of someone who had graced a magazine cover. I still remember the day I found the nerve to hand my mom the application for the Art Foundation program. She was choosing fabric swatches for the spring gala, sapphire or emerald green. I stood there, clutching that paper until it crumpled. She glanced at it for barely a second, then let out a thin laugh, the kind reserved for circus tricks. "Elena, you're smarter than this," she said, setting it aside without reading the second line. "Dreams are for decoration, not for living." I turned to my father. He was pouring bourbon by the fireplace, the same one where I had once taped up my first painting when I was 8. He looked at me as though I had spoken a language not spoken in this house. Not anger, not shame, just silence. Long, cold, sharper than the frost outside the window pane. And I, like every child desperate to be loved the way they are, nodded. I folded the paper, slid it into a drawer, and locked it away. But that night, I drew. Under the soft yellow light of the attic bedroom, I sketched a woman walking away from a grand house. She held nothing in her hands, but her eyes weren't afraid. Only one person ever saw that drawing and said, "You don't need anyone's permission to paint the world you see." Ethan Blackwell. Hair always a mess, ink smudged on his sleeves, legs propped up on the art room table long after class. He was the heartbeat in the quiet halls of Reed Academy, the only one who didn't laugh when I said my paintings spoke for me. We shared afternoons sneaking into the old parking lot to spray paint murals, exchanged obscure indie playlists, and whispered promises that even if the world turned its back on us, we'd still have each other. I believed him, with the kind of blind, unshakable faith only 18-year-old girls who've never known collapse can afford to have. And then, one afternoon in early April, I placed the third pregnancy test on the sink, my hands still shaking, and I knew my life was about to be painted in a different frame, one without gold trim, without gallery lights. I didn't cry. I just stood there, listening to the rain tapping on the glass rooftop above the third floor. It sounded like someone running away. I grabbed my old hoodie, walked down the stone staircase, cold beneath bare feet, and stopped at the door to my parents' room. "I need to talk to you." My mother turned, her spoon frozen mid-stir. My father didn't look up from his magazine. "If this is about art again," I took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Silence, the kind that stretches long enough to hear the faint wheeze of the heater in the corner. Finally, my mother placed her teacup down. No shock in her eyes, only the hollow disappointment of someone watching wine spill onto the wedding gown she had picked for someone else's future. My father rose, walked to the window, and stared into the garden where nothing grew except stone statues. From now on, you're no longer a Reed. They didn't yell, they didn't cry. They simply erased me, a blank space in the family portrait. That night, I left with a backpack, $300 rolled into an empty paint tube, and a heart that hadn't shattered yet, but would. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing. If I could just keep a brush in my hand, I'd find my way back to myself, even if I had to paint my life from scratch. I remember every sound from that night. The wind slipping through the cracks in the attic window, the kitchen clock ticking, slow, deliberate, like it was counting down to something coming undone. And then the phone, buzzing in my hand, 3 rings, then his voice. "Elena, it's late. Is everything okay?" His voice was still low, still soft, but there was a distance to it, like he'd already stepped a few feet out of the room we used to share. I closed my eyes. My fingers gripped the edge of the headboard. I need to talk to you. It's urgent." There was a pause, a sigh. "Are you all right?" My throat was dry, like acrylic left uncovered overnight. "I'm pregnant." No gasp, no footstep rushing closer, just silence, heavy, metallic, cold. "Are you sure?" he asked, and I could picture him there, in his dorm, one hand tangled in his hair, desk scattered with half-finished sketches glowing under cheap lamplight. I took 3 tests. All of them said the same thing. Another breath from his end, long, stretched out like a scene that refuses to cut. "Elena, I I can't be a father right now. I just got my acceptance to Parsons. I'm leaving for New York next month. This, this is the chance I've been waiting for." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the unfinished painting on my easel. A small house sitting alone in a field of mustard yellow. And one question kept looping in my mind. What about me? What am I supposed to do with this baby, Ethan? A heartbeat. "You'll be okay. You're stronger than you think. I'm sorry." I hung up before he could say anything else. Not out of anger, but because I knew if I let him speak one word more, I'd never be able to let go of the version of him still standing beside me in my dreams. I walked downstairs. The house was so quiet I could hear the clink of my mother setting her teacup down on porcelain. My father stood by the window, still in his gray hosting suit. Except tonight, there were no guests, just me, with a body not yet showing, but already heavy with the kind of secret that ends chapters. "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you." Vivian looked up, mascara shadowing her eyes. "Is this about Ethan? Or are we back to the art thing again?" I shook my head. "I'm pregnant." The silence this time was thicker, like fog that refused to lift. My father turned around slowly. His eyes didn't rest on me long, just long enough. "That's your decision?" "Yes." "Then, from this moment on," he said, pulling a folded paper from the drawer and laying it flat like a verdict already signed, "you are no longer a Reed." My mother didn't look at me. She poured more tea, calm and precise, as if I were a stain on the white tablecloth that needed removing. I didn't protest. I walked back upstairs and packed in silence. A backpack, a few clothes, the watercolor set I'd kept since 9th grade, and when I stepped out through the front gate, the rain had just started. Not heavy, just enough to blur the edges of the painting I'd forgotten to cover. I paused at the end of the street. The lights behind me still glowed warm inside that house. But inside me, there was no fire, no fury, only space. A long, echoing space that told me if I wanted to live, I would have to begin again. No family, no lover, no roof over my head, just a brush, and the child growing quietly inside me. Ashton Heights was never a place I dreamed of ending up, but when every other door slammed shut behind me, it was the only one left slightly open, held there by a silver-haired woman with calloused hands, shaped by 40 years of holding brushes. Mrs. Lorraine, a retired art teacher, lived in a small wooden house on the edge of town, where tree roots cracked the stone path and dry leaves blanketed the windowsills. She didn't ask questions when she saw me, trembling under the awning, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes ringed in exhaustion. She just said, "If you can cook and you're not afraid of attic mice, the back room's yours." I moved into the old shed behind her garden. Low roof, peeling brick walls, the air thick with the scent of old paint and dusted wood. But to me, it was an empty space. And empty meant I could paint again. I scrubbed the walls with a worn-out brush, propped up a termite-bitten desk, and turned one stretch of red brick into a chalk wall, something the kids would later call the emotion wall. Each child was allowed to leave one mark after class. Not something pretty, something true. Caleb was born in the heat of summer. The first time I held him, I didn't think about Ethan or the Reeds. I thought only about how to keep those tiny hands free, not to hold silver spoons, but to grasp purple crayons if he wanted. In the beginning, I did everything. Dishes, weeding, errands, for Mrs. Lorraine. At night, while Caleb slept in a wooden crib we cobbled together, I took online classes to earn a community art teaching license. Each morning, I taught neighborhood kids how to water down paint with emotion, not actual tears, but the kind of release that comes when you let something buried finally float. One afternoon, golden light slanted through the cracked window pane. Caleb, then 3, picked up a white chalkstick and drew a wobbly circle on the brick wall. Inside it, 2 long lines crossed. When I asked what it was, he said, "It's you and me, sitting in the wind." I didn't correct him. I didn't laugh. I nodded. Maybe the wind doesn't need to be drawn perfectly. It just needs to be drawn. I never thought I'd be a mother, let alone a teacher. But somewhere between smudged fingers and hesitant laughter, I realized something. I was rebuilding the world, one color at a time. No gallery, no sponsors, no Reed family name. Just a chalk wall, a handful of kids no one else remembered, and a mother once erased from her lineage, but never from herself. I didn't plan revenge. I just kept drawing, quietly, steadily. And each time a child hesitantly lifted a piece of chalk to the wall, I knew I was on the right path. I didn't pay attention to the article, not until I saw my name italicized on page 3. Portland Sketch, August issue. Title, "The Chalk Wall, Where Kids Don't Have to Be Perfect to Be Heard." The photo showed Caleb standing in front of the red brick wall, a piece of purple chalk in his hand, smiling. Not fully, but honestly. He was drawing a circle with 2 curved lines inside. He told me once, "It's the sun, hugging someone." The article wasn't long. A journalist had wandered into our community art class, watched quietly from the corner, took notes, and left with a single sentence. "Thank you for showing me how gentle art can be." I didn't think much of it. Not until my phone rang one Wednesday afternoon. Sophie. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't answer right away. 6 years is long enough for a name to scar over. But then I tapped the green button. "Hey, it's me, Sophie." Her voice was soft, like a breeze through sheer curtains, but there was a tremble under it. "I know I shouldn't be calling, but Mom wants to see Caleb." I leaned against the doorway of the studio. The chalk wall behind me was chaos that day, wild lines and bursts of color, a house struck by lightning, a flower blooming from a crack, and one shaky line from an 8-year-old. I don't like to talk. I like to draw. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked, "Now they remember I exist?" Sophie was quiet for a beat, then said, "I'm not defending them. But I think you should read something." The next day, in the mailbox near our wooden gate, I found a thick white envelope, no return address. But the handwriting, delicate, slanted, I'd seen it on Christmas cards all through the first 10 years of my life. I opened it. Inside was a check, enough to cover 3 years' rent for my art space, and a small note, no more than 4 lines. "This is what you should have had. If you'll allow it, I'd like to come watch you teach. Not to judge, to learn. Charles Reed." I held the paper so long that the chalk on my fingers smudged its corner. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel rage. Just something strange. Like time had stopped moving forward and taken a quiet turn sideways. I folded the note, didn't tear it, didn't rush to reply. That night, as Caleb sat coloring a red deer with no legs, I asked him, "What if someone wanted to come watch your art class? Someone who once made Mommy very sad?" Caleb looked up, squinted like a 6-year-old philosopher. "If they sit still and don't make anyone cry, maybe it's okay." I laughed. Short, but real. That Saturday morning, I sent a simple email to Sophie. "Tell him, 9 a.m. sharp, no talking, no gifts." None of us knew it then, but that would be the first time the Reeds stepped into the world I built, not for reputation, not out of duty, but because they were starting to understand something. There are things you don't get to buy back. You can only stand still and watch. The new Roots exhibit was held in a repurposed warehouse. High ceilings, raw brick walls, soft lighting spilling over frames hung low, just at a child's eye level. Caleb stood beside me, fists clenched around the hem of his shirt. He was too nervous to add anything to the chalk wall that day. He just stared quietly at the drawings clipped to the wire, as if wandering through a forest made of pastel smudges and construction paper. I was bent down adjusting Emma's painting, a house with a heart-shaped chimney, when I heard footsteps. Familiar, but off, too rigid, too certain. I looked up. Ethan. Hair slicked back, gray blazer, a smile polished like showroom glass, the kind that had never known the weight of a rain-soaked night. In his hand, a copy of the very magazine that featured my class. "Elena," he began, voice smooth as laminated paper. "I saw the article, and I saw Caleb." I said nothing. "He's grown," Ethan continued. "Handsome. Looks like you. I think it's time I took responsibility." "Responsibility?" I repeated, calm, even. "Were you there when I cut the cord alone in a county hospital? When Caleb had a fever of 104 on a winter night and I ran through the snow to get medicine, where were you? When my hands cracked from mixing paint just to afford a new watercolor set, where exactly were you, Ethan?" He took a half step back, not from my words, but from the way I stood, straight-backed, steady, nothing like the girl who once trembled on the Reed family doorstep. "You have every right to be angry," he said, softer now. "But legally, I still have rights. Caleb is my son." Caleb heard that. His eyes darted from me to the stranger standing across the room. He gripped my hand tighter until my knuckles stung. Before I could speak, a voice broke through behind us, deep, unshaken. "He has no rights here!" Charles Reed stepped out from the shadows, no suit, no tie, just a man, holding a thick folder, eyes no longer cold but focused, the gaze of someone who had once been silent and was done being silent. "I hired a lawyer 6 years ago," he said, his voice deliberate. "All documents pertaining to Ethan Blackwell's parental abandonment, messages, medical records, sworn testimony from Lorraine, the woman who sheltered Elena, are accounted for." Ethan froze. "If you're not gone in 3 minutes," Charles continued, "this will hit the press, and you won't be the golden boy in design anymore. You'll be the man who left a pregnant teenage girl to chase a scholarship." Ethan opened his mouth, but only managed a breath, then turned. His steps fumbled, catching on the frame of a student's easel. Caleb clung to me. I knelt and looked him in the eyes. "You okay?" He nodded. "That man's not my dad. My dad is the one who helps me mix purple from blue and red." I pulled him into my arms, feeling my throat tighten. Not because of Ethan, but because my son had found his language, and he didn't need anyone else to name it for him. When I stood, Charles was still there. He handed me the folder, then stepped back. No apology, no speech, just a single nod. And for the first time, I nodded back. Not to forgive, but to acknowledge I no longer stood alone in defending the world I had built with my own hands. I didn't destroy the Reed house. I just stopped trying to walk barefoot into it like a child begging to be let in. Instead, I built a home of my own. Red brick walls, a white-painted desk, and a small space where kids didn't have to be perfect to be seen as important. The chalk wall in the studio thickened with memory every day. The rough sketch of a flying fish from a quiet, heavy-hearted child. the handprint of a girl who had just lost her mother, and a faded line in yellow chalk from Caleb. I like mornings when the sun is out and Mommy doesn't draw sad anymore. Every Saturday, Charles comes, not with the posture of a powerful father or a man trying to redeem himself, but as an aging man with slender shoulders, carrying an old tin of oil paints, sitting beside Caleb in silence, asking questions like, "Want to try this color?" Or, "If the sky had two sides, which would you paint brighter?" Caleb answers in the way kids do, vague, full of wonder. But I notice how he sits a little closer to Charles each week, how his shoulders no longer tense when the door creaks open. That's a kind of forgiveness no one has to announce. Vivian showed up for the first time after Caleb's school orientation. She stood just outside the classroom window, clutching her purse like she was stepping onto sacred ground. I didn't invite her, but I didn't ask her to leave either. Now, she visits most Wednesdays, bringing apple pie and old fairy tale books I remember from my own childhood. She doesn't just read the stories, she becomes them. Her voice changes with every character, and the kids erupt in laughter. One day, Caleb whispered, "Grandma tells stories funnier than you." I smiled. No jealousy, no sting. They never said sorry. No tearful letters, no confessions. But they stayed, week after week, quietly, consistently, no contracts, no terms. And on a day when the rain fell soft against the windows, I let myself admit it. I was letting them stay, but only on one condition. No one, Reed or not, would ever silence my voice again. I was once the child whispering in a corner, drawing pictures no one looked at. Now I stand in the center of the room, point to the easel, and tell the kids, "You don't have to draw it right. You just have to draw it real." And each time a child steps forward, chalk in hand, pressing color into rough brick, I know. My revenge was never about destroying the past. It was about building a present strong enough that the past no longer gets to decide who I am. Late afternoon. The last light of day slipped through the chipped window pane, casting soft orange ribbons across the worn concrete floor. Caleb sat by the chalk wall, his head tilted, adding the final strokes to a red fox in a motorcycle helmet. I stood a few steps away, arms folded, watching in silence. The air smelled of chalk dust and new paper, with faint hints of drying paint. In the distance, the clack of a typewriter echoed from the admin room. The quiet rhythm of a new life. Not glamorous, but certain. High up on the wall, where I'd left a blank space from the very beginning, were words I once wrote in white chalk. They'd been there for 3 years. No one ever erased them. Every child has a voice. If you listen the right way, you'll hear it. I've never been one for speeches. I don't write long captions. Don't speak from stages. When someone interviewed me after the first exhibition, I gave one answer. Just one sentence. Art is how we remember ourselves when the world forgets. Since then, I haven't felt the need to say more. When Charles asked if I wanted to help rebuild the Reed family gallery, I said, "There's no need to rebuild it, just let the kids draw on it." He nodded. No argument, no negotiation. Vivian now leaves handwritten notes in the basket of my bike, a few lines about what Caleb said that day, or something she saw on her walk to class. Once, she wrote, "For the first time in my life, I envied how you teach children through silence. I never knew silence could be so gentle." I folded the letter, didn't reply, but I kept every word, because I know now. Most battles inside us aren't won with weapons or words. They're won with presence, with staying when others leave, with turning pain into something others can touch, learn from, and add their own color to. I used to think revenge meant forcing them to kneel, to beg. But it turns out the deepest kind of revenge is needing nothing from them to become who I am. Now, each day, I watch the chalk sticks grow shorter. Colored dust gathers in the corners, and I know I don't need to shout to be heard. I just need to stand still and let the white chalk on the wall finish the story for me. What I learned from starting over with nothing but chalk and silence. There are moments in life when you're not just erased, you're cut out of the frame like you never belonged. I was 18, pregnant, and told I was no longer a daughter. No shouting, no apology. Just a door closed behind me, and silence. I used to think survival meant proving them wrong, that one day I'd come back triumphant, holding success like a trophy in their faces. But it doesn't work that way. Instead, I learned that revenge isn't about shouting louder. It's about building quietly until your existence becomes undeniable. I didn't win through confrontation. I won through presence. Through every moment I stood beside my son when no one else did. Through teaching children that their voices matter, even if they're shaky, even if they don't fit in gilded frames. And when those who once erased me showed up, I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I simply stood still and let them see what I had built without them. That's the lesson. You don't have to fight to be seen. You don't have to force forgiveness. Some truths are loudest when spoken in chalk and remembered in silence. Let your healing be your answer. Let your presence be your proof. And let those who left you watch. Thank you for staying until the last line of chalk. If this story touched something in you, maybe a memory, a scar, or a quiet strength you didn't know was there, thank you for being here. These stories aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever had to rebuild after being left behind. If you believe in the power of quiet resilience, if you've ever been the one no one bet on, if you've ever whispered your worth when no one listened, subscribe for more true stories of strength, redemption, and the quiet kind of revenge that doesn't destroy. It rebuilds. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this story stayed with you the longest. Your voice matters here, even if it's quiet.